So I've been a pizza delivery guy for a decent amount of time, and I usually get stuck with a crappy shift, 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. I live in a pretty small city out in the boonies, so there's only like one murder per year in our area. Well, last month there were 3. Back-to-back murders. We drivers keep on top of stuff like that, but hey, we average out pretty good for just driving around the city all night, so it wasn't anything to get too worked up about. Anyway, it was probably around 1 a.m., and there was only me, another driver, a cook, and our manager, who's in his mid-20s. He's really cool and understanding because he'd been a driver himself in his teens. We were all finished with the cleaning and stuff like that, because it was an unusually slow night. Then we finally got an order. I was the so-called lucky one who got to take a delivery down the dirt road in the middle of nowhere. I'd personally never delivered to that area, but it was about 10 miles from where I lived. So I knew there were only going to be about 5 houses on that lonely 4-mile stretch of road. I put the pizzas in my car and started my drive. I'd just put 2 12-inch subwoofers in the back of my '99 Honda Accord to complete my white trash look, but they weren't secured, and since it was an unkept dirt road, I was driving pretty slow. My GPS told me I'd arrived, but it was about a mile off. I turned down the subs and pulled up to what I believed to be the house. Our boss has a thing about never pulling into the driveway, no matter how much of a walk it is. And this was one of those times I actually thought I'd do what he says. I grabbed the pizza and the receipt and walked up to the door. It was a long driveway, and what sucked was they'd left every light off, outside and inside. Probably just watching a movie, I thought to myself. It wasn't that unusual for this time of night. I got to the door and knocked. Nothing. Great. A 10-mile drive for nothing. I knocked again and started to get uncomfortable. That's when I heard it. The quiet sound of someone, or something, walking. It was coming from around the side of the house I couldn't see. I was getting unnerved and decided this was a great time to head back to my car. I didn't want to go back empty-handed, though. Once I got to the safety of my car, I called the person, figuring they were just asleep, or that I'd imagined the footsteps, or maybe mistaken them for the house settling. No answer. I decided to balls up and head over for one final knock. I put my phone on flashlight mode and walked back up to the door. One more knock. Nothing. Then I heard the footsteps again. I turned my light toward the sound and saw a man wearing some kind of werewolf mask, standing maybe 15 feet from me, just watching. I didn't think. I bolted from my car with him closely on my heels, but it was obvious he wasn't the fastest man out there, and I made it with time to spare. I threw the pizza in, floored it, and nearly clipped him with my bumper on the way out. I called the police. Turns out the call had come from inside that house, but the actual residents were out of town. This was only a few days ago, and they still haven't found the guy. I've attached a picture of the house for anyone curious. I was parked by the red marker, and the yellow shows roughly where he was standing. I still wonder if that man had anything to do with the murders in our quiet little town. But whoever he was, he probably wasn't in it for the pizza. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that mask, the long snout, the matted fake fur, the way the eye holes never seemed to blink. I gave a statement to the sheriff's department the next morning, and a deputy drove out to the house with me to point out exactly where I'd parked and where the guy had come from. He wrote it all down, nodded a lot, and told me they'd look into it. Small towns don't have a lot of manpower. I got the feeling my report was going into the same drawer as the 3 murders from last month. I actually took 2 days off work. My manager, Dale, covered my shifts himself, and didn't even ask questions, which told me he probably believed me more than he let on. When I finally came back, the whole store already knew. The other driver, a guy named Petey, who'd been doing this even longer than me, kept calling it the werewolf house, like it was a joke. But I noticed he stopped taking any orders that came in from that side of town. Nobody said it out loud, but we all started avoiding that road. Then, about a week later, we got another order from the same dirt road. Different house number, but same road. Maybe half a mile further down from where it happened. Dale saw the address pop up on the screen and looked at me before I even said anything. "You don't have to take this one," he said. I almost didn't, but something in me wanted to see it in daylight. Well, not daylight. It was still night. But I wanted to prove to myself the road wasn't cursed or whatever. Petey offered to ride along, which he'd never done before in the 2 years we'd worked together. He grabbed a tire iron from his trunk before we left, just in case, and I didn't argue with him about it. The drive out felt longer this time. Every mailbox, every dark tree line, every dip in the road had my hands tight on the wheel. We passed the house from before. It still looked empty. No lights, no cars. And I swear Petey stopped talking the second we drove by it. Neither of us said anything until it was well behind us in the mirror. The new house was different. Porch, light on, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, a normal-looking family in pajama pants who tipped well and made a joke about how late their order was. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the calm part of something, the setup before a punchline neither of us wanted to hear. On the way back, Petey finally spoke. "You know, they never actually said whose phone the call came from," he said. "The dispatcher just said it pinged from inside the house. Didn't say it was a landline. Didn't say it was theirs." I hadn't thought about that. If it wasn't the homeowner's phone and they were out of town, then somebody else's phone had made that call from inside a house that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. Somebody who knew the address well enough to order a pizza there. Somebody who wanted a driver specifically, a driver to show up alone, at night, on a road, with no other traffic, and no cameras. Neither of us said the rest of it out loud, but I think we were both doing the same math. 3 murders in 1 month, no arrests. A masked man at an empty house that had just placed an order for delivery. And now a second order. Same road, 1 week later. We didn't get another call from that road for the rest of the month. I told myself that was a good thing. Then, near the end of my shift last Friday, the phone rang, and before I even picked it up, I already knew, somehow, what street name was about to come out of the dispatcher's mouth. I was right. It was a lazy Friday night, and I had the house to myself. I was in the living room with the lights off, watching movie after movie. It was past 10 p.m., and I had a craving for pizza, so I ordered a pie from the local late-night place. It was raining out, part of the reason I'd decided to just stay in. Ironically, I was watching a scary movie at the time. At some point, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the front stoop. I waited for a knock or the doorbell, but when neither came, I muted the TV. Curious. I walked to the front door and quietly slid open the little cover above the peephole to see who was out there. I expected the pizza guy. At first, all I could make out was black. It took me a second to realize I was looking straight back at someone's eye, pressed right up against the other side of the peephole. I jumped back, startled. Through the door, I asked if it was the pizza guy. A deep voice answered. Yeah, it is. Something about it didn't sit right. I looked through the peephole again, and now it seemed like he had his hand cupped over it. I asked, louder than I meant to, why he was covering it. No answer. Just a knock. I told him to leave and backed away toward the living room. A minute later, the doorbell rang, and the same voice called out, "Pizza, open up." I checked the peephole again, still covered. I told him again to leave, or I'd call the police, and I shut off the TV so the house went fully dark. For a while, all I could hear was rain. When I checked the peephole again, he was gone from the stoop. I called the pizza place and asked if they could check whether the driver had actually reached my house yet, and explained why I was asking. The guy on the phone said he'd call the driver and get back to me. 2 minutes later, he called back. The driver hadn't arrived yet, and told me I should probably call the police. He said the driver would call when he got close. That's when I heard knocking at the back door. I remember thinking this couldn't actually be happening. I felt sick walking toward it. The back door has a pull-down blind over the glass for privacy, and it was already down. I still don't fully understand what happened next. But as soon as I got close, before I'd made a sound, the same voice said, "I see you there. Open the door." Then the handle turned. It was locked. I told him again I was calling the police. Right then my phone rang. The actual delivery driver, saying he was outside front. I told him to come to the front door fast. I opened it, let him in, and he asked if I was okay. I asked if he'd mind staying until the police arrived, and he said yes without hesitating. Police showed up about 10 minutes later. Having someone else in the house with me made an enormous difference. I don't think I could have sat there alone with that going on. There were no more sounds or knocks from the time the driver got there to the time the police finally left. I went straight to bed after and pushed my dresser in front of the bedroom door, which probably wouldn't have stopped much of anything. But it made me feel like I'd done something. Whoever that was, he never came back. It was a little past 9 p.m. on a Saturday, 3 years ago, back when I was delivering pizzas for a place called Gino's. It was my last delivery of the night. My last delivery at that place, ever, actually. Not because my shift was ending, but for reasons you're about to find out. I was supposed to drop off one regular pizza at a house about 10 minutes from the restaurant. I got there fast, since I always drove a little too fast on deliveries. It was a gated property, so I had to park on the street and walk through the gate, up a long stone pathway lined with dead-looking hedges, to the front door. I rang the bell and waited. No answer. I knew it worked. I could hear it echoing inside, so after a minute I rang it again. That's when the lights in a room beside the front door flicked on. I glanced up at the window out of instinct, and there were 2 people standing there, perfectly still, just watching me. Not waving, not moving toward the door, just looking. It was one of those moments where every hair on your arm stands up before your brain even catches up to why. The front door opened, and a man in a pig mask stood there. I couldn't see anything of his actual face through the eye holes, just darkness. He sounded genuinely cheerful, almost too cheerful, like he was performing for an audience. He apologized for the costumes, said they were in the middle of a roleplay party, and told me to step inside for a second, while he went to grab his wallet. It was cold out, and I wasn't thinking straight. So I stepped in. He shut the door behind me and disappeared down a hallway. I glanced into the adjacent room where I'd seen the two people at the window. Empty. Whatever had been standing there was gone, and I had no idea where they'd gone to. The man called for me from another lit room further in. I still had the pizza box in my hands, and I remember my palms were sweating right through the cardboard. I walked in, and what I saw stopped me cold. 6 chairs, all draped in white sheets, arranged in a tight circle like something out of a seance. 4 of them were occupied by people in plastic animal masks. I remember a rabbit, a deer, something with too many teeth painted on it that I couldn't place. Candles burned low along the windowsill, the only real light in the room, and the air smelled like melted wax and something underneath it, sweeter, that I didn't want to think about. The pig-masked man said, "Come in, it'll just be a moment." I asked what exactly they were role-playing. All 5 of them broke into this low, overlapping laughter that didn't sound like it belonged to any of them individually, like it was coming from the room itself. He told me to sit in one of the empty chairs. I didn't answer. That's when I noticed someone else, a frog mask, half hidden behind the wall to my right, watching from the dark like they'd been standing there the whole time, and only just decided to let me see them. I said they could just keep the pizza and started backing toward the hall. The laughter stopped instantly, all at once, like someone had cut the audio. No one said a word. 2 of the seated figures stood and started moving toward me, unhurried, almost casual about it, which somehow made it worse. I threw the pizza box as hard as I could into the room and bolted for the front door. I heard footsteps behind me the whole way to my car, and someone actually got a hand on my passenger door and tried to break the window before I floored it out of there. I drove straight back to the pizzeria and told my manager I'd basically been robbed, if not about to be kidnapped or worse. He didn't even want to call the cops. I quit on the spot, against my better judgment about walking out with no notice. I got another delivery job a few months later, and nothing even remotely close to that has ever happened to me again. I work as a new breed driver at night to make a little extra cash. Friday and Saturday nights are always the busiest because everyone's either home or with friends and ordering food. So those were usually the nights I would work. I got a request on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. to pick up McDonald's for a guy named Kyle. He lived a few minutes away from my current position. So I punched in the nearest McDonald's, which was like a 2-minute drive away, and picks up his order. It was a small order. I think he only wanted 2 hamburgers. He lived like 5 to 7 minutes away from the McDonald's. I followed the app's directions to the house, and eventually it led me to a short, dead-end street that veered off another dead-end street. The house was the last one on this dead-end road. It sat right next to a line of trees that ran alongside a highway, though it was pretty much dead at this hour. Given how late of an hour it was, I didn't want to ring the bell. So I called this Kyle guy's number. It rang once, then went to voicemail, so I hung up. Then I got a text from him, though he told me to come to the door, and so I did. I got to the big wooden front porch of the house, and soon the front door opened. A bald guy opened the door, and he didn't look very old. He looked to be in his 30s, yet his head was completely bald. Maybe he was sick, or I just liked that look. So I didn't judge. However, his breath was disgusting. and he seemed to be quite drunk. So that was a little off-putting. The payments were done through the app, so usually there was no need to wait around for money. But this time, this Kyle guy asked me to come, put the pizza on his kitchen table while he ran to fetch a tip. I didn't object to free money, so I waited in his kitchen, which, by the way, was only a little by a small outlet-sized nightlight, so it was pretty dim in there. The whole kitchen smelled rather disgusting, though I didn't know what it was. Kyle was taking awfully long down the basement, fetching this tip. So I started to wander a bit. I stepped into the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. The TV was on in there, which was the only reason I could see anything. However, the stench was even greater in this room. Then I noticed that the back door was slid half open. Maybe he was airing out whatever that putrid odor was for the hell of it. I walked to the back door, expecting to get a quick breath of fresh air, but the smell only got worse. Then finally I stepped outside onto the man's back deck. I heard flies, the sound of a swarm of flies right by the door. Then I guess a motion-sensing light saw my movement and turned on, revealing 2 big black garbage bags stuffed with 2 long objects. The smell was unbearable. It took me a second to catch on to what I was most likely looking at. Suddenly waiting around for the tip didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I went back inside and rushed to the front door, and just then, I heard Kyle emerge from the basement, calling to me. We having a few singles in his hand, he saw me as I was about to open the door and asked where I was going. I had to come up with something. So I said, I was just rushing to check if I had something in my car. He said, okay. As he came over to me and handed me the bills, then he turned to the back door to the porch, where the light was still on. Then he looked back at me with his gummy smile. Now disappearing, he asked me in a firm voice. If I went to his backyard, I told him no. And he just stared at me, not saying anything. I didn't give any anymore. I opened the door and walked myself out, but not without him grabbing my shoulder as they got onto the stoop. I yanked his hand off my shoulder and ran to my car. I saw him run back inside with the front door still open. I turned my car on when I sat and watched his front door, curious to see if he'd come back out. And he did. He came back out running full speed from my car with a big metal rod in his hand. I drove away from his house, ready to call the police and report him. I called when I got down the block, making sure to leave him no time to dispose of those potentially dead bodies. I waited down the block and saw police cars pull up literally within 2 minutes. I watched the whole thing as I told police where to go and facts. Kyle, if that's his real name, and already started moving the bags, which did contain dead bodies, to the bushes in his backyard. Everything about this guy was off for leaving the back door open to reveal dead bodies. To a pizza delivery boy, may have been deranged, but he also wasn't the smartest man around. I deliver food for an Asian eatery, and my